Well, good day. I'm Kim Williams, and I'm delighted to be with you here today to bring some thoughts and some ideas about how we might think a little differently about our faith, particularly as we deal with some really challenging, specific social justice issues. So, what I'd like to propose today is. Uh, the first thing I want to do is propose that we look at an old saying that has been useful, even inspirational to us in the past, and discover a way that we can see that saying through a different lens and have it give us some guidance, perhaps differently than it has before. And then I'd like to take that different lens and allow it to focus on a very challenging and specific issue that is a pretty hot topic right now in our society here in the United States, and particularly in the Southeast. Um, that's what I'd like to do, to spend a few minutes talking about with you, and I hope you find it edifying and find some information that might be helpful to you. But before we begin, what I'd like to do is just to offer a prayer, and I would ask you to join me in prayer. Wonderful God, we give you thanks for this day and for this opportunity to be together through the technology that you have given us the minds and the wisdom to create, and allow us to connect virtually even when we can't be together actually. We give you thanks for that. And I ask that in the next few minutes that the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts might be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. So there is a saying that is not quite as popular today as it once was, but it certainly is familiar enough. And that is the saying, "What would Jesus do?" It's a clever enough saying, innocuous enough. What would Jesus do? The intention is clearly there, and it's catchy. It even, the initials WWJD even make a nice bumper sticker, and you've probably seen some of those flying around over the years. It's a good question, and one that is certainly worth pondering. What would Jesus do? Asking this question about Jesus, about anyone really, what would Kim do, or what would Dave do, or what would who do, is a gateway that we can use to enter into the realm of that person's core makeup or their very character. So when we're asking what would Jesus do, or what would anyone do, we're asking what motivates this person. What is it that is this person's decision framework or their moral compass that gives them guidance as they make decisions? In short, if we're to take a stab at knowing what someone would do in a particular situation, it's imperative that we know a lot about them, really, that we have experienced their character as it plays out in life, and seen and experienced them make decisions, or at least seen the documentation of those decisions as they made them. The better we know the person, the better we can truly understand their point of view, the better we are then at predicting what in fact they might do in any given situation. And then that can offer us guidance. Perhaps the best way to know is to walk a mile in that person's moccasins, as the old saying goes, to live as they live, to be them, or at least to have parallel experiences that we can connect with. And herein is the problem. What would Jesus do? Can we ever really be Jesus, even for a moment? As much as Jesus was fully human, he was also fully divine. And so theologically, there's a barrier there about drawing a distinct parallel between who we are and who Jesus was or is, because we are not fully divine, and maybe we are struggling to even be fully human. We're imperfect and struggling, fractured human beings in our best state. We can imagine what it might be like to be fully human or divine, but we're speculating, and we can really understand only in part what it would be like to be Jesus. So theologically, there's a disconnect that prevents us from fully knowing what would Jesus do in terms of understanding from the inside out his perspective. But there's a deeper problem in asking the question, what would Jesus do? If we think about it, Jesus had a very specific ministry, a very specific calling in life. He was born in a particular time, grew up within a particular socioeconomic structure, and in his own way accepted a very dramatic calling directly from God, the Father, to love people, to minister to them, to make and teach disciples. And here's the real problem. His main calling was to give his life, both the life he lived and the life he gave up through death, as a redemption for humanity. And the last time I checked, that mission, that particular ministry, that particular calling was completed. John 3:16, for God so loved the world, that God gave his only begotten Son, that whomever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. It's at the very core of our faith as Christians that there was a moment in history, an event that happened around the life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus that totally transformed our existence and gives us access to things, permanently gives us access to things through the Spirit that we never had access to before, that a way was made and that way is open. So we not only can't be Jesus, if we really think about it, we shouldn't try to be Jesus, because what Jesus came on this earth to do is done. Asking what would Jesus do may be, in fact, the wrong question that we are called to ask as Christians, as little Christs, as followers of Jesus. What if instead of asking what would Jesus do, we focused on a parallel question? We focused on not trying to be Jesus or be like Jesus, but we focused on ourselves. What if growing spiritually was not at all like behaving like someone else, Jesus or Mother Teresa or Mahatma Gandhi or whoever? But what if growing spiritually and fully and becoming more whole and more complete was really about who we are and what we are called to be, what you're called to be, what I am called to be? If that's the case, then the better question would not be what would Jesus do, but it might be that the Christian question is, what would Jesus have me do? What would Jesus want me to do? Taking the totality of who I am as a human being, as Kim Williams, a 62-plus-year-old white male in the United States in the year 2020, with a college degree and a graduate degree and a business background, what tools would Jesus have me bring to bear on life in any given situation? Might be a better question. One of my favorite prayers actually comes out of the 12-step program, and many of you know, go figure, know that that is a program that is very near and dear to my heart, a program through which my life was actually transformed. And in that 12th step, it says, we sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. Let those words settle with you for a minute. Praying only for knowledge of God's will for us and the power to carry that out. What is God's will for me to do? What would Jesus have me to do? This life, this gift of personal mission, can certainly learn from Jesus' teachings and choices. We can look at the moral character that guided many of his decisions. And in some ways, isn't that really the origin of the saying, what would Jesus do? It's the idea that if I had the same moral compass, the same character that the man Jesus had, what would my decisions be? And we certainly can glean lessons by looking at the life, the stories that we have been passed down and we are told through scriptures and church tradition about the decisions Jesus made and the moral compass that guided him, his teaching and choices. And I need to figure out what I need to do to fulfill that mission in my life. How do I discover my moral compass or create one? My purpose and my spiritual journey is tied to my choices about my own life decision. So the question here again is not so much what would Jesus do, but what would God have me do? What would Jesus have me do with my life? That's the lens I'd like for us to turn a little from its traditional focus to a little different focus that really is about what am I called to do as a Christian with who I am, my story, my unique flaws and my unique gifts, to look through that lens and go, okay, what would God have me do in this situation? This situation. Perhaps this situation is no better demonstrated than when addressing one of today's most volatile issues of social justice, racism. Have you been listening to the news or paying attention to the social media feeds, seen the reports of what's been happening, how the innate and sinister flavor of racism that we had hoped to expunge many years ago is still running very rampant in our world. You've no doubt heard about Christian Cooper, a black man who was bird watching in Central Park, who had a verbal confrontation with a woman, Amy Cooper, that resulted in a massive amount of media attention and some really difficult consequences. Christian was targeted, all likelihood based on the reports, because the fact that he was a black man and by a white woman, and threatened with the weapon of the police. And as a result of that, a lot of focus has gone to that situation. And Amy Cooper, I understand through what I read, has lost her job, lost much of her status and standing in the community. And even Christian Cooper himself has come out with statements about the severity of things that escalated out of their interaction. The reality of it, though, is that there was a poison that was a part of that, that racial tension and situation, a poison that infected Amy, that has infected our society, that allowed for the fallacy that took place to take place. Unfortunate, tragic, toxic, and even more disturbing is the situation in Minneapolis, where George Floyd was stopped by officers there, and whether he was violating a law or resisting arrest, the reality is that the way he was arrested and detained likely resulted in the loss of his life. And for all intents and purposes, it didn't really have to be that way. There could have been a very different outcome were he not treated the way he was treated, very likely because of the fact that he was a black man in that situation. These are just two examples that you're already aware of, and I'll leave you to ferret out the details and understand the facts and figures of what actually happened in both of those cases. But the reality is, if you just look at the social reaction to these two instances, you see that there's an inflammation in our society around race and around rights and around privilege and around expectations that desperately needs to be corrected, that needs to be addressed. What would Jesus have me do? I read a wonderful article this week, and in that article it proposed that it is impossible for a white person in our society to take the safe position of simply stating, well, I'm not a racist, as if somehow a self-proclamation that as a privileged white person, by me proclaiming that I am not personally racist, I am somehow contributing or have contributed to the cure that desperately we all need to find, the cure of prejudice and myopia and other limitations in our society and for us individually. So the article proposed that it's not possible for a white person to take the position, I'm not a racist, as some sort of defense or cure or antidote for the situation, because the reality is that so infected is our society and our systems around prejudicial guidelines that to say I am not a racist is to ignore the fact that racism is running rampant, and that really only two positions that are possible for an individual today, and that is that you are either actively anti-racist, working actively to fix the problem, or you are by action or inaction supporting racism. And as I read these words, I found myself asking the question, what would Jesus have me do? What is God's call upon will for my life? And how do I find the power to carry that out? I don't know the answer for you, but I will share this. I did run into an article, which I'll be happy to share with you if you want to contact me following this message. I'll be happy to email you the link, and I'll give you my email address at the end. But I ran across an article entitled 75 Things White People Can Do for Racial Justice. 75 things white people can do for racial justice. And it's not enough that we do no harm. We need to create some change. I'm going to share 5 of the 75 things that were presented in that article for your consideration. And then I'll tie things up and we will be done for today. Number 1, go to Google and Google whether your local police department currently outfits all on-duty police officers with a body-worn camera and requires that that body-worn camera be turned on immediately when officers respond to a police call. If they don't, write to your city or town government representative and police chief and advocate for it. Body cameras, advocate for them. Second thing that I thought was worth mentioning. If you or a friend is an educator, if you are an educator or have a friend who is an educator, buy that friend or yourself books that feature people of color as protagonists and heroes, no matter what the makeup of the classroom might be, no matter what the age really of the classroom might be, but get books in the hands of educators that feature people of color in roles that are atypical and more true to life. People as protagonists and heroes, people of color as protagonists and heroes. 3, donate. If you have the financial capabilities, donate to some anti-white supremacy work, such as your local Black Lives Matter, the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls, Southern Poverty Law Center, the United Negro College Fund, and their On and On, A New Way of Life, Dream Defenders, the Sentencing Project. There are literally dozens and dozens of groups. I'm sure whatever your parameters are, you can find one that a donation would be right for you. 4, join or start a Daughters of Abraham book club in your church, mosque, or synagogue was the suggestion. A Daughters of Abraham book club is actually a women's book club that focuses on interfaith relationships and understanding different faiths and ethnicities. And so that's an option. And you can Google Daughters of Abraham book club if you want to learn more about that. And then the 5th thing I'll suggest with you, and this is one that I'm going to do myself. I've heard quite a bit about it, but I have not done this yet. There is a film on Netflix called 13th. And it's really about the 13th Amendment. Watch it. Better yet, get a group of friends together, or make a family members together, and watch it together, either physically in the same space, or agree that tonight all of us are going to sign on to our own individual Netflix accounts, and watch it at 7 o'clock, and then have some discussion about it via email, or by phone, or by Zoom, or some other way. So those are 5 of the 75 very practical things that were suggested in this article, 75 things white people can do for social justice, for racial justice, that hit home to me. And as I read them, as I read through the list, there are things that resonate with me that feel like something that I, Kim Williams, a white male in the southeastern part of the United States with a graduate degree, and experience both as a minister in business and in the year 2020, could do that would be in line with what Jesus would have me do, to make change. So the next time you find yourself traveling down Silas Creek Parkway or Country Club Road behind a car with a bumper sticker that says WWJD, maybe just allow that opportunity to ask yourself, to prompt you to ask yourself a different question. Not what would Jesus do, but what does God want me to do facing the issues that we have today? In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.